Hello, I am your host, Tracy Atsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for another episode of ADHD for Smartass Women. Today is our 300th episode. And whenever there's a milestone podcast, everyone always wants to ask me, who are you going to have as your next guest? And the implication is that it should be someone that's well known, right? That everybody knows. But honestly, I could care less about that. I mean, that's never what this podcast has been about. So instead, what I thought was I would like to have my son Markus join me for our 300th episode. Even though we only interview women on this podcast, we know there have been a few notable exceptions. Dr. Ned Hallowell, he's one of my favorite people on this earth, episode number 106. My husband and Markus and my daughter Atea as part of a family episode, which was episode 200. I seem to like to interview my family. And then about a year in, I interviewed Markus on episode number 51. He was still in high school. And I did that because if it weren't for him, I wouldn't even know about ADHD. I wouldn't know I have ADHD. And he is actually the reason why I started this podcast to begin with. So given that Markus has just graduated from college in May, I don't know if you recall, but he went to 3 high schools in 4 years. He had 3 majors in college in 4 years, and he just recently got his first job. So I thought this was the perfect time to close the loop, right? To see what happened to the kid with ADHD and dyslexia, who was told by his high school head of schools that there was nothing more she could do for him, and was then told by his college counselor that he was not college material. And so I thought Markus could probably offer us all some advice, since lo and behold, he got through the school system relatively intact. And I just sort of thought that this would be a good way to put a bow on all of it. And so then we started talking. And I have to say that, and I don't think it's because I'm his mom, okay, maybe a little bit because I'm his mom, but I was just blown away by the advice that he gave. I certainly didn't know what he knows when I was 22. I wish I did. I'd probably be farther along, right? But I also suspect that many of you will get glimpses of yourself and your kids by listening to what Markus has to say. So I am just delighted to introduce you to my son, Markus Stefani. Welcome, Markus.
Yes. Hi.
Okay, so I wanted to have you on because I feel like this is closing the loop, right? I started this podcast in 2000, I think it was 18. The first episode launched in 2019. And I really started it because if it weren't for you, I would have never been diagnosed. But you were diagnosed, and then all of a sudden I got so interested in ADHD and I wanted to learn. I wanted guardrails on my learning, and I thought the podcast would be the best way to do that. And so probably about a year in, I think it was episode 51, exactly a year in, I had you on the podcast. You were still, I think you were completing your senior year in high school. You had just been accepted to NYU, and COVID hit. It was right around that whole time frame. I actually did have you on the podcast as far as the family episode, but other than that, I haven't had you on. And I just thought this would be the perfect time to close the loop because you've now graduated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you just got a new job, which you'll start in the middle of October.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so tell us about the job. That's probably where we should start. Because, someone asked me the other day, and I'm still quite not sure what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm going into recruitment consulting. Essentially, half of it's like recruitment, the other half's like consulting. That's why the name is a combination. So I work on both. It's a 360 desk role, which in recruitment means that you work on the client and candidate side. So the consulting portion is more on the client side, dealing with consulting clients for their positional needs, filling gaps in their company, like in terms of contract workers or even full-time employees. And then the recruitment side, the headhunting side is more on the candidate side. At the same time, you're also sourcing and like creating and kind of filling out your own book of clients that you can refer to and use throughout your career.
So are you excited about this job?
Yeah, I think I'm excited to work in like a fast-paced industry. And you get a lot of responsibility pretty young, which I think is good for working, especially in your first position.
Is there anything that worries you about this?
Not really. I'm not really someone who worries about anything when it comes to like work. If anything, I think a job where it's more based on performance is probably better because I think I hate industries that pay everyone equal no matter the effort you put in. But I'm not really worried. I think I was probably raised to kind of go into something like this.
Okay, so what do you mean by that? And why is it important to you that you're paid based on what you're able to achieve rather than, kind of like what everybody gets?
Well, I think you go into industries that pay what they give or pay the equal amount to everyone because you're afraid of being outside of safety. So I think it tends to attract people that have more traditional mindsets or have been raised in families that tend to be more boring in a sense because what you're targeting is guaranteed income, which for a lot of people, a lot of Americans is better than anything because it's safe. And there's no harm in being in the safe industry. Safety is important, especially if you have more bills and more overhead than like a 22-year-old. But I think when you're really young, you should go into industries that have more risk in general. But I also think there's personality types where risk is important. I think guaranteed income doesn't mean a lot of income. It just means you have some amount of income always. I think I'm more someone who's tailored to industries where I can make more based on what I put in. And I think I'm someone who's more willing to put more risk into like my everyday life for a bigger gain.
And why do you think you're like that?
I mean, I think it's genetic, right? Your environment raises you a little bit. I mean, growing up with a dad who's in an industry that's the same exact thing, where you might have a base pay increase of $40,000 in 28 years or something very minimal. But if you're good at the commission portion, you can make triple or quadruple what people are making in traditional like industries. So I guess that influenced it. But also, I think a big influence, especially sales, being in the sales side, is freedom. I think when you're raised with someone who does super well, but also is like at every family vacation and was able to like do everything with us, even at my age at 22, I still want that like level of freedom. Like if I want to go travel or if I want to be able to work somewhere else, I want to be able to know that if I just put in what I need to put in, I can do it wherever. So I think that was a huge factor. And I also think, I don't, I guess people that go into these industries tend to be more hungry, I think. And when you're raised, I think around people that take more risk and are hungrier, you kind of naturally pick it up.
What does it mean to be hungry?
I think a lot of people think hungry means to be aggressive, which I don't really think it means. I think a lot of people equate it to like being really overly masculine and like kind of like Marine boot camp, like trying to just like. I think it's just more a sense that you're betting on yourself, and I think people that are hungry are just less afraid to challenge themselves because they know that they're not afraid they won't make it. I just heard something recently, I forget from who, about everybody that's ever been successful, the only trait they've had in common is that they always believe they're going to end up there. Um, so I think that's part of it.
What about, I mean, what I always hear about recruitment is that, yeah, if you're good at it, you can make a boatload of money, and the people who are good at it love it. But for other people, it's the rejection that's so difficult. Are you worried about that at all?
No, not really. I mean, I think a lot of people that go into recruitment that don't like the rejection are people that were playing it safe the rest of their life. So it's a shock to their system to go into something that doesn't always end up. I mean, if your job is spreadsheets or something that's the same, very like simple, as long as you do the math right, you're never really going to mess up. But in recruitment, you could do everything. In sales in general, you can do everything right on a call and still have someone hang up just because they are in a bad mood. But I'm not really worried about that for myself, just because I don't think I'm someone who's ever been like that safe. I always feel like I bet on myself more than most people bet on themselves. I think if you're smart enough to know yourself, you wouldn't go into an industry that's going to put that much strain or pressure on you to not like get beat up over rejection.
Well, why don't you tell us? as far as, you're talking about, oh, well, if you haven't taken risks in your life and you haven't had to bet on yourself. And so from that, I'm getting that you really think that in your life so far, even at the age of 22, you've had to take a lot of rejection and you've had to take a lot of risks. Is that
Hmm.
true?
Yeah, I would say I've taken more risks than the average person at my age. I mean, when I think about the people I went to school with, especially in college, a lot of them are super smart, but I think, I mean, a lot of them have been like doing the same thing since they were 13. They've had like this plan mapped out since they were like a child, and they've never kind of the farthest they'll stray from that plan is maybe doing like consulting instead of investment banking. So it's all like within the same industry. I feel like I didn't grow up with like that kind of mindset. I don't really think I ever like had a career path that I was like very set on. And I don't think even until I was probably until I turned like 19 or 20, probably 19. No, I think I was 20. So around 20 when I finally settled that I would do something in business or business adjacent. But it wasn't like I was 7 years old, like some people I know are like 10 years old going to like small business conventions and like but I also think it's how you're raised too. I mean, if you're raised by people in an industry or you're raised by a family that really pushes an industry, sometimes you never break out of the mold.
So are you saying that a lot of the friends that you have, it's not that, at 7 years old, they were saying, I want to do this. It's more, oh, this is what the family is suggesting that they do. So they're going the same route as their family and not really thinking about, okay, well, wait a minute, what is it that I really want to do?
I mean, I think there's two parts. I think part of it's New York. I mean, I think most people don't pick their industry based on what they love in New York. I think if it's such a high cost of living, if you want to live here, you kind of have to either be supported by like a tremendous amount of generational family wealth
Mm.
and do something you love, or you have to do kind of one of these like more in like the gutter jobs when you start, just to like reserve some money before you go pursue something else. But what I would say is I think there's different paths to that, and for a lot of I know people, a lot of people that I think end up in really traditional industries have that familial pressure too, where it's kind of this idea that like my parent did this or my parent came from a different country to do this, so I have to do this kind of mindset, or I'm from like this area of the East Coast and everyone from that area does this, so I have to do the same thing. Whereas I think I have a lot of friends that also ended up in like banking or other traditional sectors that also didn't have that pressure. They just kind of fell into it. So I think it depends, but I also think New York's like a huge driving factor. I think everyone here chooses their first career based on kind of how much can you make and how much can you afford.
So do you think you've done that too?
I mean, I don't know if I picked my specific area based on salary or income because then I would have ended up probably trying to be in like private equity or something really young. But I mean, I do think I knew from the minute I got here that I was going to do something in business or sales or something like that. And I think a lot of that's my own personality, but I do think there's a percent that is like, I'm not going to go work a job that I can't even afford to live on. And I also think when you're so young, a lot of people don't know actually what their passion is. You have to kind of work, so why not choose a job that gives you a little bit more of an income and a little bit more financial security to like explore other things?
So do you feel like you know what your passion is?
I don't think I know what my passion is in the sense of industry or idea, but I do think I'll probably be in sales or some formation of sales for my whole life. Even if it's like goes to finance sales or something adjacent to finance, I think I'll be in sales. I think my passion lies in like I think I have a passion for selling stuff or for that flexibility, but I don't know like what denomination or what area of sales I'll end up in 30 years or
But don't you think passion is so if you pick sales, sales can be selling anything, right? And
yeah.
obviously, if you believe in what you're selling, then and people need it, then it's going to be a lot easier. And so I'm wondering when you say, I know my passion is somewhere in sales, is it really in sales or is it something that you're going to be selling that you're going to be selling that you're passionate about?
I think it's probably more in sales because I think I'm someone who likes the personality of salesmen. I know a lot of people think salesmen are really like greasy and they get a bad rap. But I also think salesmen are like the smartest people because they can sell anything. If you can sell anything to anyone, you're smarter than everyone. Because clearly, I mean, I mean, I don't agree with some of the stuff that's sold, but there's people that can sell life insurance that are total scams to like millionaires who should know that but just because they're such a good salesperson, so I think there's something in sales where the people are really bright, but I also think again, it's like the idea that if I get enough experience in sales, I can always just start my own company. I can sell or come up with a method to sell something that's myself or like my own product, or I can come up with something, a better way to sell tech or something for other companies. So I think it's that. And I also think I don't think your only passion has to be your job. I think people always think that should be the truth, but I think it's more important that your job lets you explore, has enough time for you to actually find other passions. So I think a big reason I like sales is because maybe like I love traveling. I don't think there's another industry you could work in where like at 26 or 27 you could probably go work in a different country for a year.
Mhm.
And it's things like that that I think allow people to be more interesting. I think this combination or this kind of like intersection where people think their passion and job need to perfectly align leads to unhappiness. Because then you're unhappy in the job you're in, but you're also unhappy because you don't have time to find the other passion. So I think actually separating passion from job can be beneficial sometimes.
Yeah, I say that all the time just because, well, purpose, especially, right? Your purpose doesn't always have to be what you're doing. In fact, for a career, in fact, sometimes people will take what they believe their purpose is and they'll work in it and it'll kind of ruin it for them.
Yeah.
I hear that a lot with musicians.
I
And,
hear that all the time with everything.
yeah.
People that go to school for anything that's kind of like more creative, they a lot of times they don't end up working in it because it's like their thing that keeps them from, if they moved that passion to a job, they would lose the thing that makes them be able to work another like a job. It's that separation that when it's lost, they kind of lose all like sense of self.
So you just graduated in May. You stayed at NYU, and that was not always a given, right?
Hmm.
In fact, there was a time sophomore year where you basically said, I'm leaving.
Hmm.
Can you talk about that? And can you talk about why you ultimately decided to stay? And now, with hindsight, was that a good decision, do you think?
Yeah, so my sophomore year, I looked at transferring to more of like a traditional school, like in the South, like one of the Ivies of the South, or doing something where I could go to a business school, but also be like at more of a like football culture, like traditional American university. And then I ended up not transferring. For me at least, I remember it wasn't that much to do with major or school. It was more just it's really hard to move to like a traditional school your junior year because you're not in like fraternities as a freshman. There's all these like levels of things that you have to figure out that are really hard to get into as a junior, and they can make it even a worse experience there. So I decided to stay at NYU. And I think I switched my major that next year, so that helped a lot with it, just like going into something that was more interesting for me. But I ended up staying, and I mean, I was happy to go here by the end of it. I mean, I studied abroad. I did a bunch of stuff that was really fun. I still think, looking back, I think NYU is still the best school I could have gone to. I think if I'd done more, if I'd known college or this kind of level of college is what I wanted my whole life, I would have probably rather preferred to go to like a Michigan or somewhere with the same level of education or like the same level of business schools and things like that, but has more of like the traditional college atmosphere. But I don't think that's uniquely me. I think most of my friends that went to NYU, a lot of them think the same.
So it sounds like what made a difference was you changed majors, and I want to talk about that in a second. I'm going to write that down. But it also sounds like, or maybe it's just that I know this personally, that I think what made a big difference was finding a group of friends that you felt connected to, that made a difference.
I mean, I think I had friends in New York I liked before I went to Prague. So I wouldn't say I didn't have friends I wasn't connected to. I would say more that Prague was the first time I felt like I kind of, weirdly enough, Prague was super small, but it felt more like going to a traditional school for like a semester because there was more. of like a brotherhood in the sense, or like it was so small that you almost like felt like you were in high school, which sounds like counterintuitive to like a big like traditional college, but in a sense, that's what like traditional colleges are. They have these frats and things because people like become really close. So I'd say that had some impact. I think it was changing my major really helped because it gave me more free time and more time to like do other activities and not just like have hours and hours of like math and things that I had to go through. So I think people that choose their major based on like reputation or based on like the name of the degree are probably doing it wrong. And also, to be honest, a lot of this really good degrees have some of the easiest paths. Like the business school at NYU is considered one of the easier schools to get through because once you're in, it's not that hard. It's just getting in. So selectivity doesn't always mean like level of education. So I think that definitely helps. But I also think once you get to junior year, I think this happens to a lot of people at all schools. You get to that year and it's just too late. You're already like gone through so much of the school that you're like, I might as well finish. And I might as well finish here because any transfer is going to add a year. And the worst thing to do if you don't already aren't like someone who loves college is to add another year.
So are you glad that you made the decision to stay? Did it ultimately all work out because you figured out who your people were, you really liked your major, did it all work out?
I mean, I'm glad I stayed for the brand recognition mostly. I mean, it's like that's what you pay for at schools like this is that like if I live in New York or in the East Coast the rest of my life, my and it won't matter what I majored in, my degree, like where I came from, the school NYU just holds a big name here, a lot more than the only other school comparable in probably the rest of the tri-state area. There's like two, Princeton and Columbia. So it's like very much this like elite feeder school for like all these banking and sales and finance jobs. So I think the name's worth it. So I think just for that alone, I'm happy I went here. I mean, I think I'm happy too because I think you start to like maybe I didn't love NYU that much, but I definitely like the East Coast a lot more than I did as a sophomore. You
Mm.
start to discover that there's like more outside of your school. Um, and I think you realize that industries are really strong here. There's a reason so many people live in the tri-state area, and there's a reason why it's such like a mecca for so many things because it's the best place to be. Um, I think I don't regret going at all. And also, most people move here most people that go to Ivies or little Ivies come here after college to work too. So you kind of get a leg up also in just like living. We've been here 5 years. All my friends are going into our fifth year here. People come in for their first year and they have to balance a job in a new city and like figuring out all these things. And we don't have to do any of that. We're lucky enough to just like be in the city permanently.
When you first got there, I mean, you grew up in the country basically. So when you first got there, you did not like, well, at first I think you probably thought it was fun, right? But then as the days went on, you did not like being in this concrete, I think you called it a concrete jungle. But since then it's changed and you really like New York City now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first came, I didn't like it because the only major city we grew up near was San Francisco, which is so different. It's so laid back. It's a lot of greenery, a lot of hills, a lot of water. I think the culture is just like so techy there. It's just really different, a lot more vibrant. Like sees like the better weather, I would say most of the time, except when it's really rainy and windy. But so I never had been in a big city that is literally just a slab of concrete, like in an island. And there is water, but it's like rivers, so it's not real water. And I would say New York's probably the least integrated city I've ever seen in terms of nature. So it's not like it's a beautiful place sometimes. I think what changes though for a lot of people that move here from not just from California, but from like Texas, I have a lot of friends from the Midwest, places that are perceived as more like tech and slower and more calm, I would say. So honestly, anything outside the East Coast proper is kind of a lot calmer. Is that you get adjusted to the pace of life here. You get adjusted to the way of life. You get adjusted to you kind of become a New Yorker yourself and like attitude and the way you present yourself. It's really easy to learn to be faster. It's really hard to unlearn to be fast. So as I started going home, I started realizing like I'm much more New Yorker than I thought I was. And I think that's the first thing that always changes. You get home and you realize, wow, California is too slow. Like sometimes you just want people to be rude so stuff moves. Um, and you go to, and you think, and like the industries are just kind of slow there. Like banking itself and sales, I don't think it's not as fast paced as here. And you come back to New York and you realize maybe I do like it here. Like there is some benefit to the speed. And so that was the first thing. I also think you start to get really adjusted to the time. It sounds weird, but Eastern time is a lot easier to be on because of the closeness to South America, to Europe, to all these other markets. You're not as far behind, so you can communicate with people on different time zones. And there's something nice about being awake before the people on the West Coast are awake. And then I think once you have those two things, you start to like the city a lot more because you realize the benefits of living here outweigh some of like the lack of beauty. I'm not really a beauty person either. Like I'm not someone who looks for beauty. It's more so that I just felt like I was trapped in like endless rows of apartments. But the thing is that like concreteness makes it a better city than like a San Francisco to live because you don't need a car. You have much better transportation. Like it is a much more friendly city to be in your 20s than a lot of these other cities. And I think it's just mainly the pace. Like you never can unlearn the pace. I know like a lot of people, I have a lot of friends who went to California schools, and it's similar to like a lot of kids come from Hawaii to California, and the pace is faster in California, and they never go back.
Mm.
So I think the West Coast really, as much as Hawaiians say where the Californians are fast, the West Coast in general is super slow. And I think there's positives of that when you retire or you're like have a more calm job because it is nicer. But when you're young, I think you should be in this like high paced, fast energy kind of in your face environment.
Why?
Because if you can't handle it now, you'll never be able to handle it. And I think people think you shouldn't. Not everyone needs to like be experience this, but I think experiencing it just makes you a tougher individual. And I also think a lot of people, the high paced environment means more opportunity for growth, not just in like financial means, but also in like uh, industry means or like connection means. Like everyone lives here. If you ever want to move somewhere else, it's so much easier to go from New York to anywhere. It's so much harder to go to school in New York and then move to Texas, get a job there, and come back because that's always a red flag. Why did you leave New York? You couldn't handle it. So there's definitely but that's the truth. There's a mindset that your first jobs should be in New York because it shows that you have like that grittiness to maintain and stay here.
So do you think that Frank Sinatra song is true? If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere?
I mean, I think it's semi true because you're going to be probably tougher than anyone in any other major like financial or market hub. I think we're tougher than London in terms of how life is here. I think even in the Asia, I think the only place it might be tougher is like the Japanese banking environments or the Korean banking environments, but they're just kind of messed up essentially. So I think it's semi true. I also think it's just I think that more stands to the fact though that New York is like the best bounce or like trampoline. Like I think if I ever want to go back to California, I could probably get a really good job there because New York is so highly valued. And I also think if you go to NYU, you've already made it 4 years. You should just stick it out a couple more just to have your first like industry experience here.
Do you think you're going to stay there long term?
I don't know if I'll stay in New York my whole life proper, but I won't be surprised if I end up in the tri-state area or somewhere surrounding it in the future. I just think it's a lot easier to work in New York and live outside of New York than it is to work in San Francisco or LA and live outside. I mean, you can still get to on the train to like from Jersey in 30 minutes. But I don't know if I'll be here like 30 years straight. I think I'll probably live in different countries at least a couple of times. Knowing like my brain type and my personality, I think I'll come back to the East Coast later on.
So you just signed your first job and you had to go through a lot of rejection. I just remember when I was young, you would go in, you'd meet the person. There was a job posting in the newspaper or through your career counseling office at college. And you would go in, or law school or whatever, you would go in, you would meet the people, and they'd either offer you a job right then and there, or you'd go home and then you get a letter. There was no, not even an email, you'd get a letter. And the letter would say, congratulations, or, I'm sorry, but we're not going to be able to hire you. Versus what I watched you go through was insane. you would literally get to the fifth round, sixth round. You had done presentations for them. You had literally done work, spreadsheets, whatever. And at the sixth round, then you would be out. How did you stay motivated through that? Because I was actually shocked that you, or frankly, anyone can take that much rejection. Like it became laughable. And I'm curious, is this what all your friends were pretty much going through?
I mean, I think there's two factors. I think the first factor is industry. I mean, if you choose to work in, I think say like sales is really lucrative because of tech sales, all these areas that you can get into, and banking is the other really lucrative. And those are the two sectors I'd focused most of my life on or my career on. So I think you don't get that mad over rejection, partially because you know the industry you're trying to go into. It's definitely an industry where you just have to get one job, and that can be like the catalyst for your whole career. And it's also an industry where there's so much demand that in this market right now, honestly, getting any job is considered like a really good, like you've done a great job recruiting because recruiters aren't trying to hire a ton of people. I mean, there's like like computer science fairs happening in California where they're basically telling people not to show up in colleges because they don't have anyone who has internships available because there's such a lack of hiring in certain areas because of AI and all this stuff. So I think that's part of it. You have to know your industry. I mean, I think it's probably a lot easier to get a job if you're in an industry that's less lucrative and less sought after. I mean, there's a reason the hardest industries are the hardest. That makes sense. And then I also think second, if you're gonna, especially if you're gonna go into sales, rejection is even if it's nothing personal. I mean, if you make it through 5 or 6 rounds, it might feel personal, but you still got through 6 rounds. They clearly at some point, through many points, thought you were the right person. And you also never know the reason they didn't take you. It could be that they had someone with more experience because there is jobs right now where it's a gap of 0 to 5 years. So it could be someone more experienced. It could be an internal hire. There's all these different factors. I think those two things. And then I also think if you're negative, you'll just never get anything because there's some level of emotion or some level of belief that has to be internal that you'll find something. I mean, yeah, and I mean, it's also hard for me to speak for most people just because I still did go to NYU. Like, we still are like one of us in Columbia are the two schools in New York. So I probably still have it a lot easier than 50% of people or most people trying to move from California or Washington or other states from really good schools, but no pathway to New York.
Do you think that experiencing so many transitions because of, ADHD and dyslexia and all of the stuff in schools, you went to 3 high schools in 4 years, majors, you had 3 majors in 4 years. And then on top of it, kind of the job rejections that you had, did that make you more resilient? Did that make it easier for you, do you think, to handle all this? Or are all your friends just like you? Is that kind
I
of
mean,
what happens once you're in New York?
I think partially I've obviously handled a lot of stuff, so I think that makes it better. But I also think you get really tough. I don't know, like I can't speak for people that do go to Tisch or go to like SPS or different, but if you're going into anything financial adjacent, sales adjacent, or I even say marketing adjacent, those three like big things cover most stuff. You're gonna get really tough no matter what because the recruiting seasons suck for internships too. So throughout your college career, you kind of just learn how to like deal with it and kind of move on and come up with better ways to get your foot in the door or find things. But I would also say that you should be tough, but it also might not. It sometimes doesn't matter in the long run. I know people that did incredible internships and went through so much no rejection and then ended up going through tons of rejection to get a job. And I know people on the flip side that went through tons of rejection for internships and then got like an incredibly high, much better job than you expect them to get based on experience. So sometimes that's just luck, or I mean, I don't really believe in luck. Sometimes it's just being at the right place at the right time, or also just having the right
That's
credentials or
luck.
so. Yeah, but I think luck is a cop out sometimes. I think people use luck as a way to explain things that actually weren't luck, they were just belief.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone gets lucky. I think people just think they'll do something and they get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Because then their thoughts control how they feel, which
well,
controls
yeah,
what they
because
do.
luck is a adjective or whatever. Yeah, an adjective. Is it a verb? No, it's a verb. It's a verb that implies it's not in your control. To be lucky, you had to have no impact over it. No one's, if you're applying to jobs, you weren't lucky. You clearly did something right in that job. So, but I think it's a mixture. I think you get tough from New York, and I also think you naturally, everyone gets rejected here. It's not like I don't think I know anyone who just went through a recruiting cycle ever where they went one for one. You have at least some amount of rejection.
Are you unique, though, among your friends in how you've been able to handle all this? You don't seem to get ruffled at all. You just kind of keep going, like head down, and you just keep going, and it's just almost sloughing off you as you're walking through. Or is that
I mean,
just an act?
I think I'm a little bit more level-headed in some ways, but I also think that comes from and I don't get as ruffled because I'm not really that much of a thinker of the present. I think a lot of people like obsess over what they're doing now. I think my mindset's much different in the sense that I have enough belief in myself or enough confidence in myself that I know no matter what I do, I'm going to get to the point I want to be at every point of my life. And I think a lot of people lack that. I think a lot of people think that what they're doing now defines what they'll do in 20 years, or what their first job was will be their only thing they do for 40 years. Whereas I'm like, if I love my first job, I love it, and that's great. The goal, though, is always to think like you shouldn't be thinking of life as that restrictive. It should be much more broad picture. And I think that's how I think I'm better with rejection because I don't look at it as a rejection of my whole life. I look at it as a rejection of now. And I also think people always I mean like look at uberly successful people that have done that's like 35-year-olds that have made millions or have been able to like do something unheard of. And a lot of times those people got rejected the most of anyone. And the only reason they made that amount of money is because they knew it was going to happen no matter what. I think there's an eventuality that can only be brought on by yourself.
So, where did you get all this confidence? I guess I'm going back to, I mean, you really had to navigate not great waters, right, in high school, where there were teachers and administrators who basically said you're not college material and gave you said, here, this is how you become an HVAC technician, which again, nothing wrong with that. It's just not something you ever would want to do. So there were a lot of adults around you who didn't believe in you. How did you continue to keep believing in yourself?
I feel like there's two parts. I think people that don't believe in other people don't believe in themselves. So that's why they don't believe in you because they want to put it on they're trying to put their own failure upon someone else. So I feel like I never took it that personal. And honestly, like I remember when the person gave me the HVAC thing, I looked up the HVAC salaries and stuff and was like, if I want to do this, it's a great job. Like we
Yeah.
need people to do it anyway, and I can make more than the teacher who's being mad at me. So it's just sometimes I think it's that. I also think I was never someone who thought traditional things mattered either, which I think really shaped my mindset. I don't think I'd be any less successful if I hadn't gone to college. I look at college as a degree, as my college degree, as something as a backbone or as basically a safety vault that just implies that I did something that makes me more qualified or more, and it puts me in a category that's less people are in.
Mm.
But I don't think I, as a person, would have been less successful if I had never gone. I just would have found a different way to be successful. So I think that always was my mindset. So I never looked at if someone doesn't believe in me or someone tells me to do this, that I should give up because I never thought about giving up. I just thought about different ways to accomplish the same thing. And I think this whole mindset, I think college is really good if you like college, but I think this whole mindset of you need to go to college only arose because of financial concerns and financial issues. This wasn't a thing 50 years ago because you could make a really good living doing normal traditional jobs. And I think we are seeing a resurgence of that, like people, entrepreneurs, and people not using college, but rather using their own means. So I don't know. I'm still someone like that. Like I even with a college degree from a really good university, I don't think I'm gonna ever push college on my kids as the only way to have a successful career, a successful life. I actually think when you box yourself in, you normally can't experience as much.
So, do you think that ultimately the end goal is to start your own company?
Yeah, I think there's no way I don't have my own company. And I don't think it's going to be start my own company when I'm 50. I think I'll probably start one pretty young. I mean, for me, it's something that's just always been what I want to do.
Why?
Because I think the best three things you can have in life is your own freedom, be your own boss, and control your own amount of income. And all three can be controlled by a company. If you are the number one person in a company, I also think there's a fourth layer to that. That's company brings in people, it brings in connections, it brings in meaning, which I really value, but it also leads you to sit at a lot of tables. So by starting your own company, you might be making less money when you're 35 than someone who's a MD or something like that, but you might be shaking hands with people that are billionaires or that started a company at 28 and now are 75, but I've done. So I think I think people don't realize the value in other people. And I also think people don't realize how many companies fail, which is a good thing. Most people, if you go on, I don't know if people do this, but if you go on the LinkedIn of a lot of really successful entrepreneurs, they have like 20 companies, and out of those 20, normally 17 didn't make it. It's one of the last ones that did the huge amount of numbers. So I think there's no, if you fear failing, you're never going to have a company. I don't fear failing. I'm more of someone I think who fears not doing.
Do you think there is such a thing as failure?
No, because anybody who fails is just grown. I think that I mean there's a reason there's 17 companies before every company taught them one new thing, and it took all those new things to eventually get to the thing that worked.
How'd you get so smart?
Probably my parents. I don't know. I mean, I still had a lot of education. I hope the school system does something well.
So you
Um,
majored in, you went from, it was kind of like a music type major.
yeah, I went from music to traditional econ with the emphasis on like banking, basically econ, and then I switched to sociology. But I kind of kept my electives and everything based on economics and things like that.
And so what do you think about sociology?
I think it's a really useful degree if you're someone who's willing to step outside the box. I think it's kind of almost like a history degree in some ways, which sounds weird, but it can be really limiting if you let it limit yourself. I think a lot of people think sociology is super like in depth, but in reality, it's really broad. So I think you can kind of it's a really good major if you want to pursue different areas. I mean, a lot of sociologists have been you can be a lawyer, you can go into banking or finance or sales, you can go into marketing. A lot of advertisement people are sociology. So I think it's a really diverse degree. And I think you get a really good overview of a lot of like important concepts and rationale. I mean, if you can read people, you can read anything.
Yeah, and how the economy works and how, corporate structures work and how people work and, the systems within them. I didn't really know what sociology was. And I know sometimes people are like, "Oh, sociology major, like it means nothing." Yet, I don't know, there is something about sociology. When you changed majors, all of a sudden, you got so much smarter in how you understood all these systems. And so you weren't just, mimicking, talking points that you hear all over the place. You really knew how these systems worked and what was kind of failing and what was actually
Well,
moving society forward.
that's because sociology is a true social science. So the only way to get good grades or to do well in it is to actually know how to apply the theory. Whereas a finance degree or a business degree is not applying theory, it's applying facts, which I like facts too. And sociology has facts to it, but it's a lot different to know how to do a math equation than it is to explain why that math equation matters. And I think that's why sociology is important or is interesting. It's because you're not just learning why economic systems don't work, you're learning how to read that, how to identify the players of that, how to look 25 years ahead and see this is going to fall apart. And I actually think people don't, if you go on LinkedIn, people don't realize if you look at these companies, especially in a lot of sectors, a lot of people majored in sociology, and especially a lot of people in the higher positions because it's a degree that allows people to really go up the corporate ladder. I mean, a lot of going up a corporate ladder is being able to sell yourself. And I think sociology majors really understand like body language and all these things that allow you to be more successful in these like industries.
So are you really happy that you ended up with that major, or would you have done something different had you understood the importance of college and, higher education earlier on. And I mean, you did understand it, but to you did understand it, but it was almost like it was blocked to you, and it
Yeah,
was
I just thought it was
NYU.
like a big amount of money for not a lot of return.
Okay.
No, I think I would still do sociology. I mean, I think I always wished I'd done business and gone to business school, but I think now I'm at the point where I'm happy I did sociology because I know so many business majors, and I think a lot of people, I don't think it teaches you that much stuff outside business, which is what it's supposed to do, but you don't really get a foundation of like anything else. And I do think at some point there is a point where in any field, the person who can be more interesting will normally go higher. I mean, like, especially when you're sitting at a table with people that want to speak, they don't want to listen to the same things they hear in work. They want to hear something new. So I think that's what I think for sales, it's really helpful. You know so much about so many things. I think you can have a lot of conversations with people you're selling stuff to that they might not expect you to be able to have. They're probably expecting someone who's just going to tell them numbers or tell them this, but if you can open them up to something they never thought of, you might have a chance to sell someone on something they never thought they want to buy. So I think there is a lot of advantages. And if when in the future when I have kids and stuff, I wouldn't care. Like, I think it's a major that's really evolving, and I also think the reason it was deemed more like an academic major for so long is because it only started like 60 years ago or
Mm.
less. I think NYU got a sociology program in like the 90s, so it's very much a degree that's slowly moving up. But I'm just thinking like in my classes, there was like seven pre-med sociology majors, seven pre-law, five or six people in banking. Like everyone's everywhere. So you do get a really cool perspective too in class because you have kids that are like you have students that want to go into like helping like deliver children, and then you have another student who wants to be a public defender, and then you have a student who works in investment banking. Like there's this whole like dichotomy kind of all these different opinions and seeing like people's viewpoints. So it offers like really good a conversation you never get in a business school. Because in a business school, capitalism's only taught, and all the metrics are taught as fact. In sociology, you can actually have debates about like systems of economic systems and systems of government and things like that that I don't think you get exposed to in other majors.
And I would expect that the banking majors that are taking the sociology classes, probably most of the sociology students are like rolling their eyes at them.
I mean, they used to roll around. I mean, like, yeah, because I was kind of, I always knew I was going to be in something that wasn't sociology, like traditional, like law or something like that.
Hmm.
And normally you are the only kid in the class or something that's on the, like the more pro side of traditional economic systems and things. But I liked it because it made me like, people don't realize that the only way to get stronger in your own opinion is to be tested upon it too. So I think it gives you a better foundation of why you believe in something. So even if you believe in something different, at least know why. And I think that's like the whole problem people don't realize with the US. I think a lot of the problem is people don't know why they believe in something. They just spew facts or they spew false facts. They don't have any idea what they're saying. They have no basis for it. If people actually, I mean, people have always disagreed from the beginning of time on things. It's just that societies that function well, there's reason to why they disagree.
Yeah. Well, and especially today, right?
I mean, most of my friends, whoever you believe in or whatever party or whatever, when it comes to politics or all these things, it doesn't matter to me in the sense that like I have friends that are voting on both sides, but I have friends on both sides that are voting with no reason why. They're
Mm.
not like they have no explanation for why that, even if it's the same person I agree with, to me it's like have some reasoning why. Because otherwise, your opinion is not an opinion. It's just a restatement of someone else's opinion.
No, I think that's really good. And I mean, that's what I saw in sociology. You completely changed. And I wish I could be more like you. I have such poor working memory. And so I read all the time. I'm up on everything that's going on, but when I have to go then and explain why I feel that way, that's where I often stumble because I can't remember. So I know I'm at the right place, but you are so good. You have really strong working memory. You're so good at explaining your reasoning.
Yeah.
So you were the reason I discovered my own ADHD.
Mhm.
And I am curious because you were diagnosed first at the age of 12. Did my diagnoses and learning about ADHD change things for you? Or were you like, oh my God, stop?
I think weirdly enough, the more you got into the ADHD stuff, the less realized, the more I realized I didn't have as much ADHD as they had previously thought. I
Uh-huh.
mean, a big part of that was not getting diagnosed with dyslexia until so late, which is
Hmm.
more, I mean, I've met like 9 people now in my life that have been diagnosed with dyslexia like after 17 that are
Hmm.
all men. So clearly
Hmm.
there's some giant gap there. And that all had ADHD diagnosis that are like kind of so. I think it made me realize that maybe I'm not as ADHD as I thought in like the traditional sense sometimes. I don't like lose keys or stuff. I'm so like organized. I put everything in the same spot when I walk through the door, kind of thing. I think I disliked it more as a kid. When I was younger, I think I thought it was annoying because when you're young and you're in high school, you just want to be what's like perceived as normal.
Uh-huh.
You don't want to have ADHD or you don't want to have dyslexia or you don't want to have any of these like things. You just want to be like normal. And I think a big part of that is because the school system tells you that there is a normal when there really isn't. Or they at least tell you that there's some way your brain should work and that if it's not that way, you're in the total wrong area. I think as I got older, I got more appreciative of it just because I think it's cool to have someone else like have a family that actually understands ADHD. But I still think it's funny. Like I think I mean I also probably just had a flip in my brain as I got older. But up until like 16, I think I was so much more traditional, just like impulsive ADHD, and then I just kind of like slowly as I every year I get less and less, which I think is funny. Like I feel like every year I get closer to dad, just like kind of just this like so I'm like, by 30, I might just be like barely ADHD. But I also wonder if that's because I'm controlling more of my own life.
Well, and you're also learning how your brain works. And one of the things for you is you tried medication, Adderall, really early, and it was bad.
Yeah,
It did
horrible.
not work. It made you depressed. It was awful. And we didn't even realize it until, thank God, it wasn't too late, but pretty late in. And then in college, you went back and was it your first year or your second year where you tried Vyvanse?
First going into second.
Because you had to write these long papers. And I remember you came to me and you said, oh yeah, I just wrote a 16-page paper. And I'm like, what? And you said, yeah, well, I tried Vyvanse. But you were only on Vyvanse for a couple months. Why?
Yeah, I think it restructured my brain. I actually don't think I really needed Vyvanse. I think it just gave me an idea of how to be structured for a long period of time. And then since then, I mean, I can sit for like 16 hours and not move. Like if I have to do work, I'm just like so un ADHD in that sense. I don't need breaks or have to. I hate them. I think breaks are the dumbest thing ever for me.
Well, but that's hyperfocus, Marcus. So if you're into something you're really interested in accomplishing, then yeah, we
Yeah,
don't
but
take.
I mean, like I like normal breaks. So what I'm saying, like these ADHD, like or even like normal, like people that have like what's the other, just like have bad time management. These
Mhm.
like methods, like the Pomodoro and all these
Yeah.
methods, where it's like every 20 minutes you're taking five off. I'm like, that's useless.
Yeah.
I've never met anyone in college who every 20 minutes accomplishes enough to take five off.
Yeah.
You're just constantly restarting.
Yeah. But so my comment about the Vyvanse though is clearly what Vyvanse did for you is it calmed your brain down enough so you could see what the strategies were that you needed to put in place so that you could actually get this work done. And then once it calmed your brain down enough that you could figure that out, then you no longer needed it because you had taught yourself.
Yeah, I think I just like gave myself the tools but I think Vyvanse is, I mean, I don't know for everyone, but everyone I know that's been on it, it's been so effective. All my friends that have taken Vyvanse have gone off after like a year because
Yeah.
it rewires their like, I think it's, I think they're doing more stuff on it, I'm sure, but like, I think it's probably got to be one of the more effective, which
I
I
don't
think,
know. I don't know if that's true, but I will also say that, I work with women, and that is the medication that I hear most often that they have been successful with. And I
yeah,
also think you're right. I don't know that I know anyone who's been on Vyvanse for years. Everybody that I know, it's been, a period of time. They feel like, okay, now I understand what I'm supposed to do. But
yeah.
I do notice, like you, that that seems to be the medication that is most called out that people have been
And it
successful
should
on.
be if it's so effective. I mean, it seems like it's. I mean, like I have friends that were on Adderall from like age 7 to 17, and then they never could get off it because they couldn't function without it. And they go on Vyvanse for like from 19 to 20, and then they never need medication ever again.
Hmm.
So I'm like, some part of me is always like, maybe the reason Vyvanse has been so hidden is because they know that, Big Pharma wants the thing that keeps going for 20 years because they keep getting funding. But I mean,
Oh.
Adderall, I feel like has been like there's been I feel like since the inception of Adderall, it's had so many negative side effects.
Yeah, but then for
Um,
some people, Adderall, is it changes
and
their
yeah,
life. Okay, so I am curious, what is the most annoying thing about my ADHD to you?
oh, definitely time management. I have no executive function problems. I'm identical to my dad, so I'm someone who, if you tell me to be there at 3, I'll be, even if I try to be late, I'm 10 minutes early. I can't even calculate lateness. Like I'm bad at that. Because I think it's in my internal clock to like walk faster if I'm gonna be late. I'm someone who's always 10 minutes early to like interviews. Like I'm in the Zoom link 20 minutes before. Like I'm just someone, and I'm someone who's really good at time management. Like I can plan my day down to a T, and basically within 5 minutes of every scheduled thing, I'm gonna do it. So I think that's probably the most annoying thing is that it's hard like to live with people because I think Taya's more like this too, but living with people that are a little bit more all over the place with time management. Because the only I think people get mad at people for being time good with time management, but the reality is it's probably a function of for most people with good time management of OCD. So it's like it probably makes I think there's reason it makes like people that are good at time upset is because they're probably anxious.
Well, and you use OCD in that more like they have anxiety about being late.
Yeah, exactly. Like anxiety about not being on time or not be, and I think so that's why like I'm so organized with all my like keys and stuff because I don't want the anxiety of having to search for something. So people that can have these rooms or like these areas where they're so lackadaisical or they like don't have a place they put their keys every day, I'm like that would make me go crazy. So I guess that's probably the most annoying thing, time management.
Yeah, and it's not on purpose, but I think what I realize
No, it's
is
just because you don't have, I just somehow didn't get the executive function part.
the executive function problem. Although I will say, where I see your ADHD is when you don't care about something, we can ask you 50,000 times and you will forget it, right?
Yeah, but that's what, but I don't actually forget it. I still see it. I just forget to I just don't respond for a while or something because I'm thinking about other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what advice would you give to other students or young professionals with ADHD, with dyslexia, who are navigating college and or the job market?
It's tough to like think of specific things. I feel like for people with, I mean, I could give two things of advice. I guess for people with more traditional, like executive function ADHD problems, I think your best friend in college and in the job market is organization. I was always organized in college in terms of like how I did assignments and stuff, like having a planner, an online planner. And then when it came to the job market, I tracked every job I applied to, every round, where it was moving. Like I had that down, every company, because I think it makes it a lot less overwhelming when you can like look at what you have. And I think anxiety, especially for ADHD people, can come from like searching through your emails 100 times a day, thinking that someone responded to you, but they didn't because you haven't organized it properly. I think the other thing would be, especially for kids with ADHD in college, is that you're probably gonna have like a year, or in your first job, you're probably gonna have a year or a couple months where you really dislike where you are, or you dislike your major, or you dislike the school, something. You're gonna dislike something. And I think normally it's not actually a dislike of the thing, it's just like an adjustment period. I think people with ADHD take longer to adjust to new things, which sounds counterintuitive because they're very impulsive sometimes. So they like to do a lot of things. But I think big changes for them are hard because it means that they have to have, especially college, there's more structure that you're relying upon. I can think of so many kids like ADHD that went to NYU that were my friends that would like just sleep through a whole day on accident because they forgot to set an alarm and they have no internal clock. Or they would like realize they have an assignment due at 12 a.m. at 12 p.m. the day of and have to write it in one night. So I think there's going to be like a period of that struggle. And I think the reality is if you get through that period, everything else is fine because that's just the adjustment period. I think there's like almost a learning curve to college. Like every year you're here, you get a lot better at doing the most stupid things essentially.
So I'm curious though, how do you find what works for you? Because when it comes to organization, because my thought is, oh my God, yeah, the planner, that like that doesn't work for me.
I
But
mean,
there are forms, right, that work for me that probably don't work for you, and blah
this is
blah
going to
blah.
sound weird, but I think not listening to one person. I think a lot of people go on the internet and they look up like what works, or they listen to one YouTube video about some guy who uses some method. I used 100 methods, and I'm saying the thing is I probably could use 100 because I was able to organize all 100. So there might be maybe not do 100, but you can try. I think people think you have to try one thing at one time. If one person says a planner works for them and they have a method, another person says they use an online like Notion and that works for them, and someone else says they use like Google Calendar. Try all three for like a month. And whichever one you're more consistent with, stick with that one. Normally that's the one that works. So it's like a trial and error process. Just make the trial and error as efficient as possible. And I also just think also come up with your own ideas. I think a lot of people think that someone else's idea will work. Tweak it, make it your own, do something else. I mean, you can do the dumbest stuff. If there's like a keychain or something that reminds you every time you see it to do work, put it somewhere that like on your desk. I know people that have like things that like they see and it reminds them of everything they have to do. Or get like I know for me at least, not because I'm unorganized, more because I'm just always want to know what's happening. I have a lot of like Google like screens and different like devices that I can just ask like what's my day, and it just goes down a list. So if there's any like something interactive, or I mean kids now are so good with technology, like you can probably code something that works.
No, I couldn't. But the key, though, is what you said, right? It's consistency. It's the thing that you actually use.
And I think what happens is too many people try 8 different methods over 9 months. And then by the time they find something consistent, they've had 9 months of inconsistency. So I think it's a lot more efficient. It might sound like hell, but even if you can do it for a week, managing three for a week, 3 different styles just for 1 week, because the one that you're able to manage, you're going to fail. There's going to be two you don't manage well, but the one you do manage well is the one that clearly works with your brain. Because it's super, it can be as simple as Google Calendar. I have friends that use Google Calendar for everything. I hate it because it's all these colors and it's
I
just
love it.
so. And then I have friends that like I can use Notion for everything, and I have friends that think it's so overwhelming because there's so much like interface built
Uh-huh.
in. So I think finding that like just finding it quickly is really important. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough for that period of time.
Yeah.
I mean, I use Notion every other semester of college. I would switch out of it and go to a new thing. So it's like I change my method every 6 months probably too.
And then would you go back to Notion?
Yeah, because the difference is I think also a lot of people don't refresh like their methods. Just because a planner works for you for a year, I think sometimes it's good to try something new. Because all you're doing is building another skill too. I can use all these different interfaces. If someone wants me to use Google Calendar, I can still use it. And I also think you can get bored. Like if you use Notion for a year, you might get bored of Notion and just stop opening it, even though you can do a lot of changing and stuff.
Hmm.
But I guess it depends on the person. There's people that I know that have used physical planners for 12 years.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I've got a physical planner, but it's one card, so it's easy in,
Yeah, so
easy
it's
out.
super easy to bring. I mean, there's tons of stuff that you can do to help yourself.
So, do you have any advice for parents of kids with ADHD or, kids with ADHD and dyslexia or just frankly kids in general?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when it comes to like teenagers, especially going into like starting the college process or that kind, I think a lot of kids I know that turned out better took gap years or were like allowed by their parents to even like go to a college where they just explored majors for a year. So I think this fear of having a kid major in something traditional or like viewed as really good at a very good school is what causes like anxiety and stress. I think especially kids with ADHD and dyslexia, they're probably going to be successful in whatever they decide to do. So just let them do what they want to do. It might end up coming back to the thing you wanted them to do, most likely, because influence does play a factor. but just like let them come to it naturally. And I mean, I also just think like experiences are so important. I think if you're a parent with a kid with ADHD, I think that there are the people that thrive in like being uncomfortable. So let them like kind of be uncomfortable, try new things. I think it is important.
So stop rescuing them.
Yeah, I think helicopter parents are the worst because I think helicopter parents is just an excuse for them. It's just an excuse for someone with anxiety to monitor someone else.
Mhm.
Which I'm not, so I'm saying if you are like that, there's probably something you need to like focus on for yourself. Yeah, I think like no need to rescue them. And I think you kind of do have to let them sink, which sounds crazy, but if they want to transfer schools or they're going, I think you have to, there's a period, I mean, there's obviously a period where you have to step in, but I think letting a kid spend 2 or 3 months like kind of figuring stuff out is how they stay in college or stay in the job or something. I think kids end up dropping out or going home when they're comfortable or they're comfortable being or they're uncomfortable being uncomfortable basically. Which is why I do recommend if you have like ADHD that if and you go to college you don't go close to home. Because I think the closer you are to home, the higher the chance you don't stay in college. I think ADHD brains are really good at being uncomfortable when they want to be, but they're really bad when they're not, it's not their choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it's not their choice, the first thing they go back to is familiarity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's something good in like me going to NYU. It forced me, like, I can't just go home on a weekend. It forced me to really like become comfortable with my like own views and stuff.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Probably in sales still. But I mean, 5 years I'll be 27. I don't think I'll be in the U.S. I mean, my goal is by 26 at the latest to be working somewhere other than the United States. Maybe even as simple as like London, just somewhere else. But hopefully in some sort of form of sales. Yeah, and hopefully traveling. I mean, that's like the only goal I have in life is to travel.
Why?
Because I don't think you can learn anything more than when you travel.
Why?
Like there's nothing else that can be taught. Like nothing can't be taught in travel. You learn everything.
And so is it, I think you said that you have really no anxiety when you travel, which is so weird to me, but it makes sense. And is it because you're probably constantly in that past positive network where you're in action, you're seeing new things, you're highly stimulated, so your brain isn't thinking as much?
I mean, I think anxiety is normal when you travel. Every time I travel solo, especially the first like 2 days, I'm always, and then all my friends are like this that solo travel. The first 2 days, you're like, what am I doing? Where am I? You're so anxious. You barely want to leave your hotel. It's normally when you do your first activity or the first uncomfortable thing and you see something crazy, you're like, I love it. But I also think with ADHD brains, especially, yeah, travel lowers anxiety because you don't have time to think about like comfortability. Like you're always like there's new immersion, new things, new people being thrown at you. I mean, it's kind of weird. Like everyone I know that travels a lot probably has ADHD.
Hmm.
So there's some sort of correlation between that like want to like be outside of your comfort zone. I also think a big factor is people that travel solo that you run into or other people that travel normally have the same personality type. No one that wants to travel is going to be like in the box. They're always going to be the same as you.
What's the one lesson you'd want listeners, especially those with ADHD, to take away from your story?
I think so many people focus on the idea that a straight path is a correct path. When in reality, I think that most of your growth, most of your understanding, and most of what will define you is going to be found when you veer off path. So I think embracing not being in a straight line is much better. I think someone who comes to the end of their life in a straight line didn't live their life. You should have curves and roads and turnbacks and all this stuff, U-turns. You should be all over the place because the reality is that you can only find the right straight line if you explore every line.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a number one ADHD workaround?
What's that? Like a thing that helps you?
Yeah. I always ask it at the end of every podcast.
I mean, I don't know if it's ADHD, but I would say if you hate where you're working, like if you're like working at home or something, just switch where you are. Switch your environment.
Yeah.
It's always your environment that makes you hate where you're at, not yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Like me, I can't seem to do much work when I'm at my desk. I need to, go out and be
And then you
around
try
other
to switch
people.
the desk. That's what I always do.
What do you do?
That's what a lot of my friends do too. If you start hating where you're working, you just move it to a different corner because it changes your whole perspective of where you're working.
Yeah, but where
You
am
don't
I
really
going to
have
move
that
it?
luxury though because you're in a
Where am I
living.
going to move it?
Yeah. Maybe once you guys get to New York.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, Marcus, I have this philosophy that it is no one's right to tell anybody that they're proud of them because the goal really is that they're proud of themselves. But I just wanted you to know how proud I am of you.
Thank you.
It's been the privilege of my lifetime to be your mom.
Thanks, Mom.
And that's a true Marcus response,
I'm
just
not...
deadpan. Okay. Thank you, Marky.
Thank you, Mom.
Bye.
Bye.